You need to watch this before sending your child to boarding school. Put on your seatbelt as we narrate the story of a boy named Kofi and his experience in boarding school. In the heart of the African forest, there was a small village called Nkaranza. The village was surrounded by tall trees, with a river that sparkled like diamonds whenever the sun shone on it. Nkaranza was a peaceful place where everyone knew each other, and the children played happily, climbing trees and chasing after butterflies. In this village lived a boy named Kofi. He was 10 years old, with bright eyes that always seemed to be searching for something exciting. Kofi was loved by everyone in the village, especially his mother, Ama. Ama was a strong woman with a heart as warm as the African sun. She would often tell Kofi stories of brave warriors, wise elders, and the spirits of the forest. Kofi loved these stories, and he dreamed of becoming a great warrior one day. But life in Nkaranza was not always easy. The village was poor, and many families struggled to feed their children. Kofi's family was no different. They lived in a small mud house with a thatched roof, and sometimes there wasn't enough food to go around. But Kofi didn't mind. He had his mother, his friends, and the forest to explore. To him, life was full of adventure. One day, a stranger came to the village. He was a tall man with a deep voice and eyes that seemed to see right through you. His name was Mr. Mensah, and he had come from the city. Mr. Mensah spoke to the villagers about a school far away where children could learn many things. It was a boarding school, and it was said to be the best in the entire region. The children who went there would become doctors, teachers, and even leaders of the country. The villagers were excited. They had always wanted the best for their children, and this seemed like a golden opportunity. Mr. Mensah promised that the children would be well taken care of, with good food, warm beds, and teachers who would treat them like their own. Ama was unsure. She loved Kofi more than anything in the world, and the thought of sending him away made her heart ache. But she also wanted him to have a better life, a life beyond the struggles of the village. After much thought, she decided to let Kofi go. It was the hardest decision she had ever made. Kofi was excited. The thought of going to a big school, meeting new friends, and learning so many new things thrilled him. He hugged his mother and promised to make her proud. Ama held him tightly, trying to hold back her tears. The day Kofi left for the boarding school was a sad one. The whole village gathered to say goodbye. Kofi's friends, Kwame and Ya, were there too. They promised to keep an eye on the village and send him letters. Kofi waved goodbye as he climbed into the bus, his heart pounding with excitement and a little bit of fear. The journey to the school was long, and as the bus drove through the forest, Kofi's excitement began to fade. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the sky grew darker. Kofi felt a strange unease, but he pushed it aside. This was his chance to become something great. When they finally arrived at the school, Kofi was surprised. It was not the grand place he had imagined. The buildings were old and crumbling, and the teachers looked tired and angry. The other children were not as friendly as Kofi had hoped. They teased him because he was from a village and didn't know much about city life. Days turned into weeks, and Kofi's life at the boarding school became a nightmare. The food was terrible, often cold and tasteless. The beds were hard, and the blankets thin. But worst of all were the teachers. They were cruel and strict, always shouting and punishing the children for the smallest mistakes. Kofi missed his mother, his friends, and the warmth of the village. One night, as Kofi lay in bed, he heard a strange noise. It was a low, whispering sound that seemed to come from the walls. Kofi sat up, his heart pounding. He listened carefully, and the whispers grew louder. They were saying his name. Kofi. Kofi. Come to us. Kofi felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard stories of spirits that haunted old buildings, but he never believed them. Now, he wasn't so sure. He got out of bed and followed the sound. It led him down a dark hallway, past the empty classrooms, and into the old library. The library was a creepy place, filled with dusty books and cobwebs. But the whispers grew louder as Kofi entered. He felt a strange pull, as if something was calling him. He walked deeper into the library until he reached a hidden door. It was an old, wooden door with strange carvings on it. Kofi hesitated, but the whispers urged him on. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, but Kofi could see the outline of a figure standing in the shadows. It was a tall man with glowing eyes. Kofi's heart raced as the man stepped forward. "Kofi," the man said in a deep voice. "You should not be here." Kofi wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Who are you?" he stammered. "I am the guardian of this school," the man replied. "I have been here for many years, watching over the children who come here." Kofi's fear turned to anger. "Then why don't you help us? The teachers are cruel, the food is terrible, and I miss my mother." The guardian sighed. "This school was once a place of learning and happiness, but it has been corrupted by greed and darkness. I have tried to protect the children, but I am not strong enough. Only you can change things, Kofi." Kofi was confused. "Me? How can I change anything? I'm just a boy." "You have a pure heart, Kofi," the guardian said. "That is the most powerful weapon of all. But you must be brave. There is a darkness in this school, a darkness that feeds on the fear and misery of the children. You must find it and destroy it." Kofi felt a surge of determination. He didn't know how he was going to do it, but he knew he had to try. For himself, for his friends, and for the village. The guardian handed Kofi a small, glowing stone. "This will guide you," he said. "But be careful. The darkness is strong, and it will try to stop you." Kofi took the stone and nodded. "I will do it," he said. The guardian smiled, and for a moment, Kofi felt a warmth in his heart, like the sun shining on his face. But as he left the room, the cold, dark feeling returned. He knew the real challenge was just beginning. The next day, Kofi noticed something strange. The teachers seemed more on edge than usual. They watched the children closely, as if they knew something was about to happen. Kofi kept the stone hidden in his pocket, feeling its warmth against his skin. He knew he had to be careful. That night, as the other children slept, Kofi slipped out of bed. He held the stone tightly and followed its glow. It led him back to the library, but this time, the hidden door was open. Kofi stepped inside and saw the guardian waiting for him. "The darkness is near," the guardian said. "You must be brave, Kofi. Remember, your heart is your greatest weapon." Kofi nodded and followed the stone's glow deeper into the room. The air grew colder, and Kofi could feel the darkness closing in. He reached a small, hidden chamber, and there, in the center of the room, was a dark, shadowy figure. The figure turned to Kofi, its eyes glowing with malice. "You cannot stop me," it hissed. "I am the darkness that feeds on fear. I am the reason this school is cursed." Kofi felt a surge of fear, but he remembered the guardian's words. He held the stone tightly and stepped forward. "I am not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady. The darkness laughed, a cold, eerie sound. "You are just a child. What can you do?" Kofi felt the warmth of the stone spread through his body. "I can fight you," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I can destroy you." The darkness lunged at Kofi, but he held up the stone. A bright light filled the room, and the darkness screamed in pain. Kofi could feel the power of the stone, the power of his heart, pushing the darkness back. "No," the darkness cried. "You cannot defeat me." But Kofi didn't stop. He focused all his strength, all his courage, into the stone. The light grew brighter and brighter until the darkness shattered into a million pieces. The room fell silent, and the cold air vanished. Kofi stood there, breathing heavily, the stone still glowing in his hand. He had done it. He had defeated the darkness. The guardian appeared beside him, a look of pride on his face. "You have done well, Kofi," he said. "You have saved the children and this school." Kofi smiled, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment. But as he looked around, he realized something was wrong. The room was still dark, and the shadows seemed to be closing in again. "What's happening?" Kofi asked, his heart pounding. The guardian's expression grew serious. "The darkness is not completely gone," he said. "It is wounded, but it will return if you do not leave this place." Kofi's heart sank as the guardian's words echoed in the dark chamber. He had fought so hard, only to learn that the battle wasn't over. The shadows around him seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if the darkness was regrouping, preparing for another attack. "What do I do?" Kofi asked, his voice trembling. You must leave this school, the guardian said, his tone urgent. The darkness feeds on the fear and despair of the children here. As long as they remain, it will grow stronger. You need to get the children out, take them back to their homes, where they can be safe. Kofi nodded, determination flaring within him. He had to protect the other children, his friends, and himself. There was no time to lose. As Kofi turned to leave the hidden chamber, the guardian spoke once more. Remember, Kofi, you are not alone. The spirits of your ancestors watch over you. Use the strength they have given you. Kofi clutched the glowing stone in his hand and made his way back to the dormitory. The school was eerily silent, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. He slipped into the room where the other boys were sleeping and gently shook Kwame awake. Kwame, Kofi whispered urgently, we need to leave. Now. Kwame blinked groggily, confusion clouding his eyes. What are you talking about, Kofi? It's the middle of the night. Kofi quickly explained what had happened, the darkness, the guardian, and the danger they were all in. Kwame's eyes widened in fear, but he could see the seriousness in Kofi's face. Okay, Kwame said, swallowing his fear. What do we do? We wake the others, Kofi replied, and we get out of here. We have to be quiet and fast. If the teachers catch us, they'll stop us. Kwame nodded, and together they woke the other boys, explaining as briefly as they could. The fear in the room was palpable, but Kofi's calm determination kept them from panicking. One by one, the boys slipped out of bed, gathering their few belongings. As they made their way to the girls' dormitory, the floorboards creaked under their feet. Kofi held his breath, praying that the noise wouldn't alert the teachers. They reached the door and found Ya, who was already awake and waiting for them. I heard you talking, Ya whispered as she joined them. I knew something was wrong. Good, Kofi said, relieved. We need to get everyone out. The girls quickly joined them, their eyes wide with fear but also with trust in Kofi. He was their leader now, and they would follow him anywhere. The group moved silently through the dark halls of the school, the stone in Kofi's hand glowing faintly, guiding their way. As they reached the main entrance, Kofi's heart skipped a beat. The door was locked. We're trapped, one of the girls whispered, her voice trembling. No, we're not, Kofi said firmly. He remembered the stories his mother had told him about the power of belief and courage. He held the stone up to the door, focusing all his energy on it. Please, he whispered, help us. The stone grew warmer in his hand, and suddenly, the lock clicked. The door creaked open, and a cool breeze swept through the hallway. The children gasped in relief, and without another word, they slipped outside into the night. The forest loomed before them, dark and full of unknown dangers, but Kofi didn't hesitate. He led the way, guiding the children along the narrow path that wound through the trees. The stone's light was faint, but it was enough to keep them from getting lost. As they moved deeper into the forest, Kofi could feel the darkness from the school receding, but it was still there, lurking at the edges of his consciousness. He knew they had to keep moving, to put as much distance between them and the school as possible. Hours passed, and the children grew tired, their legs aching from the long walk. But Kofi urged them on, knowing that stopping could mean disaster. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, they reached the edge of the forest. Before them lay the road that led back to Nkaranza. Kofi's heart swelled with hope. They were almost home, but as they stepped onto the road, a chilling wind swept through the forest, and Kofi felt the darkness stir once more. It wasn't ready to let them go. The sky, which had begun to brighten with the promise of morning, darkened again. The trees rustled ominously, and Kofi could hear the faint whispers of the darkness chasing after them. Run! Kofi shouted, grabbing Kwame's hand. We have to run. The children sprinted down the road, their fear giving them speed. The darkness seemed to claw at their heels, but Kofi kept the stone held high, its light flickering in the growing gloom. The village was close, he could feel it, but so was the darkness. As they rounded a bend in the road, Kofi saw the familiar huts of Nkaranza in the distance. The sight filled him with a surge of strength. They were almost there. Almost safe. But the darkness was closing in fast, its whispers growing louder and more menacing. Kofi knew they wouldn't make it in time unless they did something drastic. He stopped abruptly, turning to face the oncoming darkness. The other children skidded to a halt, fear and confusion in their eyes. "Kofi, what are you doing?" Ya cried. "We have to keep running." "No," Kofi said, his voice strong. "If we keep running, the darkness will follow us into the village. We have to stop it here." "But how?" Kwame asked, panic creeping into his voice. Kofi didn't have a clear answer, but he knew he had to try. He stepped forward, placing himself between the darkness and the children, the stone glowing brightly in his hand. "Go!" he shouted over his shoulder. "Run to the village. I'll hold it off." The children hesitated, not wanting to leave Kofi behind, but they knew there was no time to argue. They turned and ran as fast as they could toward the village, tears streaming down their faces. Kofi stood alone on the road, the darkness swirling around him like a living thing. He could feel its cold, icy tendrils trying to reach into his mind, but he pushed back with all his strength. "I won't let you hurt them," Kofi said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides. "You won't take any more children." The darkness seemed to laugh, its voice echoing in the trees. "You are brave, little one, but bravery alone is not enough. I will consume you, just as I have consumed so many before you." But Kofi wasn't backing down. He held the stone high, feeling its warmth spread through his body. He closed his eyes and thought of his mother, of the stories she had told him, of the love and courage that had always filled their little home. He thought of his friends, of the laughter and joy they had shared in the village. He thought of the ancestors, the warriors and wise ones who had come before him. "You will not win," Kofi whispered, pouring all his love, all his courage, into the stone. The light from the stone grew blinding, filling the road with a brilliant glow. The darkness shrieked, recoiling from the light, but Kofi didn't let up. He pushed forward, the light spreading, driving the darkness back inch by inch. But Kofi could feel his strength waning. The darkness was powerful, and he was just a boy. Yet, he knew he couldn't give up. The village, his friends, his mother, they were counting on him. And then, just as Kofi felt he could hold on no longer, he heard something, a distant drumbeat, steady and strong, coming from the direction of the village. It was the drum of the ancestors, a call for courage and strength. The beat filled Kofi with renewed energy, and he pushed the stone forward one last time. The light exploded outward, washing over the darkness in a wave of pure, blinding energy. The darkness screamed one final time, and then, with a hiss, it was gone, vanished into the ether. Kofi collapsed to the ground, the stone now cool and dim in his hand. The road was quiet, the air clear and still. He had done it. He had saved them all. But as he lay there, exhausted and weak, he knew that this was not the end. The darkness was gone for now, but it would return one day, seeking to reclaim what it had lost. Kofi slowly got to his feet, his legs trembling, and looked toward the village. The children were safe. The darkness was gone. For now. But Kofi knew that his journey was far from over. He had faced the darkness and won, but there were other battles to fight, other dangers to face. And he would face them all, with the courage of his ancestors and the strength of his heart. Because that is what heroes do.